Hello, my name is Ken Kinter, and I'm an assistant professor at Rutgers University. The purpose of this presentation, this is actually part two of a three-part series of videos on motivational interviewing. Today's part two, which is about something called OARS. And as usual, my contact information is right here on the first slide. If you have any questions or want to reach out to me, don't hesitate. Before we get started with the actual presentation, I just wanted to give some well-deserved respect to the New Jersey Department of Health. They're the one that funds our department, which is known as the State Hospital Psychiatric Rehabilitation Initiative. Our purpose is to improve the quality of care in New Jersey state psychiatric hospitals and to improve conditions there for the patients and the staff. So you see the details about our mission here, and our mission would not be possible without the assistance of the New Jersey Department of Health, so we thank them. Now, if you caught video number one, you caught the spirit and method of motivational interviewing. Today, we're going to be bearing down on one of the most critical parts of motivational interviewing, and that is the tools. Motivational interviewing is sort of divided into spirit and tools, and OARS are pretty much the core skills and core tools of motivational interviewing. So OARS stands for open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. We're going to go through each one of those going forward. So closed-ended questions you're familiar with. Any question that is answerable with a yes or a no or a specific piece of information is a closed-ended question. Now, the good part about closed-ended questions is they get a specific piece of information that they need. The bad part about closed-ended questions is they're limiting. I'll give you an example. Where I used to work, we used to do this substance abuse assessment, and we used to ask people a series of yes or no questions. So for example, for alcohol, are you currently drinking alcohol? Yes, no. Have you drunk alcohol in the past? Yes, no. Have you ever been in treatment for alcohol? Yes. So each drug had maybe 6 or 7 yes or no questions. Then we moved from alcohol to amphetamines, barbiturates, benzodiazepines. It was excruciating. So you're asking people at least 50 closed-ended questions, one right after the other. So I'm working with this one client, and we go through all these questions, and we get to the end, and we move on. And he said, I used to sniff gas. So I looked at him for a minute. Seemed like a strange thing to say. He said, yeah, I used to sniff gas, but that wasn't on your list of questions. And it was then that I realized that my list of questions was pretty terrible. So what I ended up doing at that point was I shifted from a closed-ended question format to an open-ended question format. And what that looked like was, tell me about your history of addiction. And then we would have a conversation about it. And then I would use the closed-ended questions to fill gaps. Like, what year did you say you were in detox and rehab? How long are you sober? Those were the closed-ended questions, but the bulk of it was just this open-ended. So tell me about your history of alcohol use, or tell me about your history of drug use, or tell me about your history of addiction. And then we would fill in those pieces. So that's the benefit of the open-ended question. It leaves it open for you to get more than just that specific piece that you asked for. And that specific piece might be really, really important. So just by means of a quick test on this, so let's answer whether these are open or closed-ended questions. So what would you like from treatment? And how you tell whether it's open or closed is, could you answer it with a yes or a no, or a very short specific piece of information? So this is an open-ended question. Was your family religious? Can we answer that with a yes or a no? We can, so that means it's closed. What do you like about drinking? Open-ended. If you were to quit, how would you do it? Also open-ended. Is this an open-ended question? This is in fact a trick question. It is either closed or the answer is no. So closed or no, or either one of those is the correct answer. So one aspect about questions is, one of the benefits of asking open-ended questions is you ask less questions. So my 50 question addiction assessment turned into less than 10. One open-ended question and then little closed-ended questions just to get the pieces. So the next part of this is probably the most difficult part about learning OARS, and it is reflection. So let's talk about the reason for reflection. The reason for reflection is that very often the meaning of communication gets lost in translation. So here we have two people. We have a speaker and we have a listener. So we have the speaker who has this meaning that they're trying to get across through words. The listener hears those words, and then there's the meaning, and then hopefully that communication has been accurate. But you see these 3 red numbers here. This is where there are built-in problems in communication. So let's look at them one at a time. So number one right here is with the speaker. And this happens when the speaker knows what they want to say, but the words just don't come out right. This happens to me every day, by the way. So you know what you want to say, the words come out, and then you go, ugh, that wasn't it. That wasn't right. Can I have a do-over, please? So that's place number one. Place number two is when the listener doesn't hear the words accurately. So my favorite example of this is if you've ever done the telephone exercise where you whisper something to somebody once and then they whisper it to somebody else and it goes all the way through a room. By the time it gets to the end, the meaning has been completely changed because it's just a compilation of people not hearing what was said properly. So that's a bunch of these number two errors all on top of each other. And then error number three is when the words mean something different to the listener than to the speaker. Now, I'm sure those of you who have teenagers can connect with this already because the meaning of different words has changed over time. The meaning of the word crazy has changed quite a bit. There are times where it's had a negative connotation, a positive connotation, a neutral connotation. The word lit right now is very different than it used to be. Even the word bad. There have been times where bad is bad, bad has been good, bad is back to being bad again. So the meaning changes. In fact, my favorite example, this is a true story, I borrowed from an NBA broadcast. There was an NBA player who was riding with a friend in a car and made a wrong turn, wasn't in such a nice neighborhood, and then a car pulled up next to them and a person held out a gun toward their car. So the guy hits the gas, takes off, but he hears shots fire as he's driving away. And he looks over and his friend has been hit. His friend's been hit with a couple of different couple shots. So he picks up his phone, gets on the phone while he's driving away, gets on the phone with 911, and he says, somebody shot my dog, somebody shot my dog. The 911 operator hears this and gives him directions to the nearest veterinary hospital because the person's dog has been shot. Now, what some of you already know is by dog, he wasn't referring to a canine, he was referring to his friend. And fortunately, the way this turned out, the veterinary hospital was right next to the people hospital. So the person did get treatment right away. The directions were not inaccurate. But you can see how the consequences of that could have been pretty bad. So here where these three errors are, and if any of these occur, and sometimes they occur in combination, then the meaning gets lost and the communication isn't effective. So the purpose of reflection is to close that circle. It's to close that circle up so that the person, the speaker, knows that not only were their words heard, but their meaning was understood. The listener communicated that back to the speaker. That's the goal. So some of the other things about reflections. Reflections resemble questions in some way, but they are different. Part of how they're different is they are a statement, and we'll be talking about how you turn a question into a statement or into a reflection. The other nice part about reflections is we'll see, and this is not going to be a sufficient look at reflections. It's just meant to be an introduction. There's going to be other materials that cover this in much more detail. Reflections also give you a chance to make a hypothesis, to make a guess about what that person meant. And you can actually lead the conversation in a direction depending on what reflection you care to use. Now, you do this already. You've done reflections with people, but you may not have known why you chose a certain reflection or what you can do with it. So these are rather important tools for your toolbox. So let's talk about this. So in a basic level of reflection, you're just giving the person their meaning back. But in a more complex reflection, you're calling attention to a particular part of what they said. But let's start with the basics. So we already established reflections are statements. That means they don't have that upward inflection at the end like a question does. So if you say, well, what time are we going home today? There's that little inflection, that way up. And if you say, we're going home at 4 o'clock, you don't have that upward inflection there. So that's one of the differences. Another difference between a question and a statement are the words that start it. So if you see in the middle of this slide, the question, do you mean that you, ... You make it a reflection by cutting all those question words off and you just say you. You say the statement as if it were true, and then the person will tell you if it's actually true or not. That's really how it works. The other way you get rid of a question word is by not starting with the question words who, what, where, when, why, how, how many. If you get rid of those, you just make the statement. Because, as you'll find out, even if you make a reflection and it's inaccurate, the person will correct you. So you still win. Because what you're really trying to do is the person wants you to understand. They want you to get it. So if you get it, so much the better, you move on. If you miss, the person will correct you and put you right on the right path again because they want to be understood. So some samples of reflections are right here. These may not work for you. These may not work for your population. These are just some sample ones that have come up, and some of these work for me. Sounds like is a nice, easy one to start with. If you just want to do reflections 101, sounds like ... You can start with that. I'm sure you will find some that work better for you than some of the ones that are up here. So before we talked about simple reflections and complex reflections. Simple reflections are one of these two types. Repetition, otherwise known as parroting, is just giving back what you got. Now, if you plan on going through a whole 45-minute session with somebody, just repeating back to them exactly what you got, you're an echo. You're not really a motivational interviewing facilitator. But there is a value in giving back exactly what somebody said to you without any interpretation. I've had very many clients who, when I've reflected back to them, I've repeated back to them what they've said, I've seen them make a face. And when they make the face, I say, oh, what did I get wrong? I'm sorry, I got something wrong. And they'll say, no, you got it right. It just didn't sound good when you said it, or it sounded different when you said it. That's the point. They're actually listening to their own words coming back at them, and sometimes they don't sound as good during that way. The other one is rephrasing, and rephrasing is where you say what they said to you, but you just change it up just a little bit. You just add it to your own interpretation. If somebody said something like, I'm really looking forward to being retired, you might rephrase that back to say, you're really looking forward to being out of here. Person might say, yeah, oh my God, yeah, I'm absolutely done with this. Or the other part would be, no, I just want to sleep in. I want to wake up when I want to wake up. So again, they've corrected it and then taken it a step further, which is the goal. It's in line with that eliciting, evoking piece of motivational interviewing. So complex reflections, this is when things get a little more interesting. So you see here, we've got 5 different ones. The first 3 are kind of variations of the same theme. So sticking with the retirement example, reflecting content means you're just bringing the facts back. So you're planning your retirement in however many years. And it's just a statement. That's it. Another aspect of this is reflecting feeling, where you take the emotion, but you forget about the content. You're excited about retiring. You could even say in a reflection, you're excited. You sound excited. No content whatsoever. All you're doing is capturing the feeling because you want the person to continue on that way. If you emphasize the content, they'll give you more content. If you emphasize the feeling, you'll get more about the feeling. And then the next one on here is reflecting meaning. Reflecting meaning is a combination of content and feeling. And my favorite reflection for people that are talking about retiring is freedom, because I'm trying to get at the heart of what they're talking about, beyond the content and beyond the feeling. What's the central thing that's going on for them? Another great example of a reflection is a double-sided reflection. And there's an example here. You're excited about retiring, but you're not sure what you're going to do with your free time. If you remember back in the first video, we talked about the double bind. When people don't make a change, very often it's because they feel like they're trapped between 2 negative outcomes and they're not in a hurry to choose those 2. The double-sided reflection captures both sides of the argument. I'll give you a couple examples. So it sounds like you want to quit smoking for your health, but you have a very stressful job and cigarettes are one of the ways you deal with the stress. Did you hear how I made both sides of the argument? One of my favorites that I heard from a client was, or my double-sided reflection was, so I hear you say that you're not an alcoholic, but I also heard you say that you have 7 DWIs. It's a great double-sided reflection. And you notice I'm not taking a side. It's almost like I'm introducing 2 prize fighters. Here they are, you know. The last one on here is an amplified reflection. Amplified reflections are interesting. And again, I'm looking at you parents of teenagers out there. So the example that's on here is being retired is the best thing that ever happened to you. My favorite example for an amplified reflection is it's when you take the truth and you just stretch it beyond all recognition. And you do that for a reason. So for example, the teenage version that I love hearing is, oh, this is the worst thing that ever happened. This is the worst thing ever. Now, the last 2 times that I heard the worst thing ever, one of them involved frizzy hair, and the other one involved the wrong person asking the teenager to a prom. So those are obviously the worst thing ever. So an amplified reflection would be going way off the scale. You would say something like, oh yeah, it'd be better to have cancer than to, have frizzy hair. And of course the person will go, well, that's ridiculous. But the point of it is to show that ridiculousness. When people come in and they're very angry and they're very upset, an amplified reflection is, this is the most upset you've ever been in your life. This is the most angry you've ever been in your life. Because you want them to stop, and then they think, and then they go, no, I've been more upset than this. So you've automatically added a little bit of perspective. In the moment, they really do believe that it's the worst thing ever, and you're kind of fact checking them a little bit, or actually better yet, having them fact check it. Next up is affirmations. This one's easier. This is praise. This is as simple as praise. Just noticing something good about somebody, calling attention to something. You know this from, your earliest time studying psychology. Anything that you praise or bring positive attention to, you increase the likelihood of happening again. So, and I'm sure that our clients don't get too much praise, and I know the staff don't get too much praise. Praise is the quickest and easiest thing you can do, especially at the beginning part of a relationship, to help grow and develop the relationship. Now, the only rule about affirmations, if I have any sarcastic people out there, and I happen to be one of them, but I'm sure there are other ones as well, it can't be backhanded. The affirmation can't be backhanded. You weren't as late as you was yesterday. You don't smell as bad as you did yesterday. Those don't work. An affirmation is completely drained of all of its positive power when it's delivered in a sarcastic manner. And the last of OARS is the summary. Now, there are a couple different types of summary. There's the collecting summary, and that is where you've had a conversation with somebody and you're wrapping up. A summary is a really nice way of wrapping up a conversation. In fact, the analogy I always think about when I think of summaries is, you ever gone to a restaurant and you're with a big group of people, 8 to 10 people, and everybody orders, and then the waiter or waitress at the end recites your order back to each person perfectly without writing it down? This is a skill I don't have. I love that because it gives you a chance to change your order before it goes back to the kitchen. If you changed your mind, this is your chance. Or if there's something wrong with the order, you get to catch it before it goes back in the kitchen, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm a huge fan of this. And this is at least important in mental health settings as it is in a restaurant. So the collecting summary, the first one here, is where you give sort of a wrap up. So I want to make sure I got everything that you told me straight. Tell me if I've got this right. And then you give it all back to them. And then you can go from there. A linking summary is when you include something that a person said at another time and you bring that into the equation. When you first came to see me, you were talking about how nervous you were about going back to school. Now you're in school and doing very well, but dealing with some of the stress there. So what I've done is I've brought something in from outside to make a point. And another version is the transitional summary. The transitional summary is you want to get off the subject that you're on. If you feel like it's going down a dead end or it's off topic or they're moving in a direction that isn't really change friendly, you can sum up everything they've said. And then at the end of that summary, you can then ask a question and you can redirect. So those are the three main purposes of those summaries. And again, I'm sure you've done some version of this, but it's the consciously being able to do it using this, specifically as a tool. So now when we do this training in person, one of the things we do is we do an exercise where you actually get to test OARS out. And how this works is you have people in groups of 2. You pick something about yourself that you want to change, need to change, should change, but haven't changed yet. That means something that you're ambivalent about. And then the listener, all they do is OARS. Now, and by doing OARS, it means no advice, no judgment, no recommendations, just open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and then a summary at the end. In fact, something else I want to add about the summary before, finishing this exercise is, when you've gotten a summary right. When you've nailed a summary and you've summarized something somebody said and you say, did I get that right? If you have it right, they will actually physically relax and breathe out. And if there's something that was missed or something that's wrong, they'll be up on the tips of their toes waiting to jump in and correct that. So there's another piece about the summary. So the listener does this. Now, one of the ways that I do this is I'll write on a piece of paper OARS, and that's like my little cheat sheet to remind me, did I do an affirmation? Am I asking open-ended questions? Am I doing reflections? So that's like my little cheat sheet. There's also a handout that has the OARS on it. If you reach out to me, we can send that to you. and it's also in the motivational interviewing book, so that you can use that. And that's pretty helpful. So a couple other closing pieces about motivational interviewing. You've heard me say during these videos that we want to do as little advice giving as possible. AA has a great saying, the worst vice is advice. And I've also noticed that the advice I give tends to be the advice I should be taking. So I don't know if the advice has more to do with me or with them. One of the ways to eliminate this is to ask the person if they're interested in something that helped someone very similar to them. So for example, you might say, you know what, I know somebody who's going through something very similar to what you're going through now. Would you be interested in hearing about what helped them? And then you either watch for the nonverbal no or you get the verbal no. Because the bottom line is, if they're not ready to hear it, go back to the fundamental principles of motivational interviewing. You don't have the best words. And even if the person isn't ready to hear it, even if you did have the perfect words, they're not listening. So save yourself the trouble. Save the advice for the time that that person's ready to hear it. So by going through this asking permission piece first, it's very helpful. So just in terms of the summary here, the tools of motivational interviewing: open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries. Go easy on the advice. Motivational interviewing, as we mentioned before, is best geared toward people that are in the pre-action stages. If someone's ready to change and they're in the action stage, we don't need to have all this. We can just put the plan in place. But the issue is that 90% of interventions are geared towards someone in the action stage. Motivational interviewing is geared much more toward people that are in pre-contemplation, contemplation, and preparation, which is most of your crowd. So that helps us match our interventions to where the person is, not where they want them to be. And the last piece on this is practice, practice, practice. This is not something you can just watch a video or read a book and do. It's something that takes regular practice and regular supervision. I'm hoping you have this when you work, where you work, and I hope this is something maybe we can help you out with as well. And we're working on developing other tools that will help you develop these skills. People that are very serious about motivational interviewing have tools where they record sessions and actually keep count of each of the OARS things that they do, or they count closed-ended questions. That's how hardcore it gets. But when you do that enough times, then it becomes automatic, and you catch yourself saying, hey, I just did a reflection. I just reflected feeling. So as we mentioned before, these people aren't necessarily ready. If they're ready to change, we move right into change. If they're not ready to change, maybe we need to take some of these other steps first. So these are the sources where this material came from. I wanted to give a special shout out to Bill Miller, who made the original version of this slide deck and gifted it to all of us who attended the training. For any information about motivational interviewing, go to motivationalinterviewing.org. That's like the clearinghouse of all information and trainings and all that good stuff. And please make sure you catch the rest of the videos in this series. And once again, it was nice talking to you, and look forward to seeing you. Hopefully you'll catch some of these other videos, and reach out again if you have any questions. Take care.